Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is quite an impromptu video as I wasn't planning on doing one today, having been at Bramall Lane yesterday to watch Sheffield United lose 2-1 to Manchester City. I did a in-ground review of that one straight afterwards. Newcastle's defeat against Liverpool has caused quite a stir given the circumstances of it, and it's been heavily sort of contested across the last 24 hours, so I thought I'd come on and give a few thoughts. It really is quite difficult to explain what happened. I haven't seen the game in full, but I'm aware of the patterns of play and I've seen what other people have said, and I've watched the goals back, and I've watched a little bit of the game as well, and I think that there's quite a lot of a pattern that's developing with Newcastle now across quite a few games. If you look at this game against Liverpool, this game against Manchester City last week, the cup final, the game against Arsenal at St James's Park, they've all got something a little bit in common, where Newcastle have had the upper hand in certain stages, but they haven't gone for the kill and made that extra step to make count at crucial points. So Newcastle went into the game against Manchester City last week. It's Manchester City away, as I said in the video. You can't really go and expect to win there, but if you could have chosen a way to play Manchester City, you would have chosen them to be tired. You'd have chosen them to have no Kevin De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva in midfield for creativity, and you'd have chosen Erling Haaland to be pocketed up front. Exactly what happened, and Newcastle didn't lay a glove on them, and I think that's the really disappointing thing to take from that game. And it's a very similar thing with the cup final, for example, last year. Arsenal in the league, when they had that penalty, they started really quickly. St James's Park was rocking in a way that it similarly was in the game against Tottenham, but then Arsenal got a goal and then Newcastle just stopped. And there's a sort of similar thing here when they took the lead early on, and they were really, really good early on against Liverpool yesterday. Anthony Gordon played superbly well throughout, and he was really on one yesterday, and he put Newcastle ahead on to 24 minutes, and you're thinking Newcastle are in business here. The crowd, they're really good at St James's Park. This is all the pre-match build-up, as often is when Newcastle play at St James's Park these days. How will Newcastle go after the opponents? How will the crowd get involved? Can the opposition cope with that? The really interesting thing, as I said in the preview of this game, Newcastle have similarities to Liverpool pre sort of early Jurgen Klopp days, and I think there was a real similarity there where teams at Anfield just couldn't handle them in the first 20 minutes, and it felt a little bit like that for Newcastle yesterday. And then you get Virgil van Dijk's red card after Trent Alexander-Arnold could potentially have been sent off as well. But Virgil van Dijk goes for a foul that for me is quite obvious. I can't believe there's any debate about it, really. For me, it's an obvious red card for a foul on Alexander Isak, and you're thinking Newcastle are in the driving seat here. But again, they didn't go for that jugular. It took a long time for the issues to sort of bear fruit, in a sense. It was the 28th minute that Van Dijk got sent off, and Darwin Núñez didn't come off the bench until around the 78th minute, scored in the 81st, and then scored again in the 93rd. So the problems didn't really rear themselves till the very end, but it was a developmental it developed over the course of the game, where Newcastle flatlined when Liverpool went down to 10 men. They really didn't take advantage of that. They went into their shell, and again it was that sort of similar thing of you're waiting for Newcastle to take that opportunity and take that initiative, and they just didn't when it really mattered in a huge game like that, when it could have been a statement. And I think they've done it at times, obviously, against Aston Villa. They've done it at times against Tottenham last year, and they did it in plenty of other games like Brentford and West Ham, as I've mentioned. But in these really crucial games where you think if they win this game, it's a real statement, and it's to showcase that they belong at that next level, they just quite often fall short in very similar ways. And I think it's to do with that mentality. And if you look throughout the squad, there aren't that many players in the squad who are used to winning games at the highest level, and used to playing at that very top level and winning those big titles. You've got Kieran Trippier, who's 32 and has been there and done it, but beyond that, you've got a lot of really talented, supremely good footballers like Alexander Isak, Bruno Guimaraes, Sandro Tonali. I know he was in the Champions League semi-final last year. Sven Botman, who are all sort of early 20s, so they don't have the experience and the know-how yet to sort of lead and go from there and build. And I think that's just a product of Newcastle's escalation over the last couple of years, and how quickly they've gone. There is a sort of element of people watching Newcastle now thinking that they are going to go for teams, especially at home, and they need to make these games count. And they've done it, as I say, against Villa. They've done it against Tottenham, but they haven't quite hit the nail against Manchester City in the cup final against Manchester United. Arsenal last season and now Liverpool, there's quite a pattern developing where you just question what Newcastle need to do to go to that next level. And I just think there's a fear that emanates within the team when this issue comes along. They froze a little bit yesterday, and I think they allowed Liverpool to take the initiative, and that's what Liverpool are. They're full of those players. They've been there and done it. They've got a manager in Jurgen Klopp that's won everything with that club. They're in a little bit of a rebuilding phase, but they've got the sort of building blocks there. They have Mo Salah on the pitch there. They have Alisson on the pitch. He made a superb save, and I think these are the things that make that difference. And it really just shows that those players stepped up for Liverpool yesterday. Darwin Núñez came on and had a point to prove and proved it. And I think that's fair play to him. There's not really much you can say about that. But this is all down to Newcastle. There's no way that in any circumstances when you're that strong at home and you're that good as a team as Newcastle are, and you belong in the Champions League. We're going to be finding out the group stages on Thursday. They belong there, so they need to be winning this game in these circumstances. There's no excuse for not. That's just not. There's no getting away from that. And I think there were some poor performances. Bruno Guimaraes gave the ball away for that goal. I'm not going to get into the situation with him in the social media from last week. That's old news now. I feel like there's a ceiling that Newcastle now need to break, and they need to hold their nerve in one of these big games. It happened at Anfield last year in very similar circumstances with a late winner for Liverpool. Newcastle were more unlucky in that game because they had an offside goal that Alexander Isak scored disallowed, and that one Newcastle fully deserved something out of that game. I'm not quite sure when you consider how they cowered for a good sort of 3/4 of the game almost with an extra man at home, everything going for them. You would think that a more experienced club would make that count, and Newcastle need to do that next. Obviously, Eddie Howe is still learning at that level, and it's a bit of a reality check for him, bit of a reality check for everyone on the ground yesterday. See, I wasn't there, so I can't really comment too much on that. The worrying thing about Sven Botman's injury, apparently there's reports that it's not quite as serious as first feared yesterday. Again, I wasn't there, I don't know, I haven't chased this up, I was in Sheffield. Whether Newcastle would go back into the market for a centre-back, I think they would if the injury is serious enough. The last thing I want to say is that Eddie Howe's substitutions were disappointing yesterday. This has all been said. People have sort of mentioned the triple substitution now, and back in the day when Sir Bobby Robson used to do it. The difference between Eddie Howe's 3-man substitution, obviously the caveat being that he has 5 to choose from. Bobby only had 3 back in those days 20 years ago. But the difference is that Bobby would always make an attacking substitution. He would take off a midfielder and put on a striker and really look to change the game in an instant. Whereas those substitutions were questionable at the best of times. They felt like they were just done to keep people happy or for the sake of it. It didn't feel like tactically it was the right thing to do, particularly taking Anthony Gordon off, who was absolutely on fire, as I mentioned earlier. That was the first time I think Eddie Howe's got some questions to answer in his approach to the game and what he was looking to do. And I think that is something that he's got to learn. And it makes that Brighton game next week absolutely huge. Obviously, they're licking their wounds from a disastrous result against West Ham at home on the weekend as well. So it's going to be a very, very intriguing battle at the best, at least. But I think it's really, really important that Newcastle can regain the momentum that they sort of fell into with that victory over Villa. Can they do that again with another win over Brighton? But then the fixtures sort of ease out a bit. We have to remember that it is Man City and it is Liverpool. But given the circumstances that both of those games have had around the Manchester City's team sheet and situation, obviously the in-game situation with Liverpool going down to 10 men, you would expect better results than two defeats. So I think that there's no major surgery needed, there's no soul searching needed beyond just a sort of little tweak of that, just in sort of improving that mentality, getting a little bit more mentally strong. Nothing beyond that is required, given that how quickly Newcastle have developed. They're just a bit ahead of themselves, and I think that they need to learn quickly if they're to carry on this trajectory. A disastrous result, but something to learn from, and I think Newcastle, everything was going for them in that game and they didn't make it count, and I think that's on them, and unfortunately that's just one you've got to say and move on. But I think Liverpool, you've got to also say that Jurgen Klopp was masterful in his substitutions, bringing Darwin on when he did, and firing him up in the situation that Núñez came into that game and really wanting to prove a point. As I say, it's just fair play to Liverpool. Newcastle are the ones with the lessons to learn. So I'll be back on Thursday with a look at the Champions League group. I'm really looking forward to seeing who Newcastle get. Do continue to like, share and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.